specific or Boston region specific or otherwise, we do know that remote and hybrid work is up massively nationwide and locally from where it was in 2019. Many of our riders may still ride on a weekly basis, but might be commuting 2 to 3 days a week instead of 5. Transportation network companies or ride hailing, that is to say companies like Uber and Lyft, provide a new option in the mobility market that has proven appealing to many despite its cost. And at the same time, we see some indications that Americans want to drive less. Census data suggests that fewer people are getting driver's licenses, or perhaps with an aging population, fewer people are keeping them. And we can point you to the chart in the upper right-hand corner of this slide. So relative to 7 to 10 years ago, the options available to our riders and our potential riders have changed, as have their needs. But the need for travel options that don't include using a car do endure. Next slide. One of the things we're proud of at the T is the way in which we've responded to changes in rider needs by changing our service. As we've discussed, the pandemic forced us to perhaps recognize an overdue realization that travel options need to be robust throughout the week. Between that need and the lessened demand for peak or rush hour service, we've been able to reallocate resources to provide robust all-day service that actually grows midday and late-night options. The chart on the slide here shows a particularly dramatic illustration. It covers our light rail services, the Green Line and the Mattapan Trolley, showing that where service just before the pandemic had 2 distinct peaks in the morning and evening and a relative drop midday, we now run a nearly flat service, as we call it, that provides consistent frequency all day long. This is just one of the several modes that the T operates, but data from our other modes does show similar patterns. As we mentioned before, we're also proud of how our new weekend commuter rail schedules since 2021 have nearly doubled weekend ridership on those lines. Next slide, please. All right. So while we're talking about what's going on with the MBTA, we can't talk about it in a vacuum. What's going on our roadways? We all know that the Boston area is famously congested, and transit provides a key alternative to spending hours stuck in traffic. But that growing congestion, and we think it is still growing, has serious implications for existing MBTA riders and for our budget as well. MassDOT and the MBTA estimate that while people took fewer trips by any mode during the pandemic, as you would expect, people across the Commonwealth now take more trips throughout the week than the pre-COVID baseline. Because most of these trips are taken by car, almost 85% by our estimates, with similar rates inside and outside the MBTA service area, we think that vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, which is a key measure that planners use in measuring traffic and congestion, is up Commonwealth-wide by about 20% since 2019. That's a lot. You may notice a chart in the upper left-hand corner of this slide that's attributed to the Commonwealth's Clean Energy and Climate Report Card, showing that VMT is still growing and modeled to continue increasing through at least 2030. In addition to the obvious implications for congestion and road safety, this is something that's important to report on in our climate plans because VMT continuing to grow, especially as many vehicles on the road are not yet electric, represents a serious challenge to the Commonwealth's climate goals. As congestion has grown across the Boston region, MBTA bus riders have felt some of the most dramatic impacts. The chart on the lower right-hand corner of this slide shows that average bus speeds have dropped noticeably over the last 20 years, aside from a brief peak when the roads were empty during the pandemic. Slower bus speeds mean longer trips for passengers and increased operational expense for the MBTA. We need more buses and more operators to provide the same level of service. So these impacts of congestion, in addition to being a challenge for everyone who experiences it, really do illustrate the need for, as we call it, transit priority infrastructure, such as bus lanes that can protect buses from traffic and enable riders to move faster. Next slide, please. So, as we've discussed, transit does not exist in a vacuum. It intersects with many other areas of life and many other fields of policy and concern to regular folks. One of the key responsibilities that we have as planners is to understand where the world around us is going and how it might affect what we need to do in the future. So as we launch this plan, we're thinking about a long list of potential variables and factors that may come into play over the next 20 to 25 years. You've seen how much the pandemic affected transit, both in the short and longer term. That is the kind of huge event that we could not have anticipated when Focus 40 came into the world in 2019. But now we need to deal with the consequences and lessons from it. What other such events and dynamics might happen over the term of this plan? Just now, in recent weeks, we're dealing with a spike in energy prices and gas prices driven by global politics, something that we didn't know was going to happen just a month ago. So our mission with Focus 2050 is to build a framework that will help us make smart decisions, even in the face of not knowing exactly what's going to happen over the next couple of decades. In the next part of the meeting, you will have an opportunity to discuss this list of uncertainties and key factors, among other things, and potentially flag other things that we should be thinking about for us. Next slide, please. So that was a lot of information, and we do hope to have more data, insights, and analysis to share in future public meetings and in the final plan. Before we move into the discussion phase, I want to kind of go back over and emphasize a few key items. First, the pandemic radically changed how people work and move around in ways that we are still digesting. Second, transit is critical as an alternative to congested roadways, but it also suffers from the impacts of congestion. And third, we're in a time of considerable uncertainty about policy, about technology, about world events. Long-range plans such as Focus 2050 have to build frameworks for smart decision-making in an uncertain world. We invite you to think about these elements and more as you are part of the conversation about Focus 2050 today and for the next 18 months. And to kick off that conversation, I am going to hand things back over to Ashley to take us into the discussion element of our meeting.
Thank you so much, Sandy. Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Paul. Before opening the floor to the public for our breakout rooms and engaging in more questions and answers, we invite any elected officials or their staff to ask questions or make comments. Please use the raise hand feature to be recognized. Okay. Going once, twice, 3 times. Okay. Now we're going to ask for your feedback about the future of the T. We're going to break up into smaller groups to talk more about what you would like to see in the future of the T. And we want to hear about your use of the T, the challenges you want the T to resolve, and about how you think our service may change in the future. We'll take up until about 6:35 to discuss in small groups and then reconvene. You'll have 1 minute as a warning before the breakout groups close. We have some questions for you that we'll be placing in the chat, and I'll say them out loud for you now as well, so you can continue to think about it as we move on into the breakout sessions. They are, what are some challenges you would like the T to address by 2050? How has your use of the T changed since before the pandemic? Do you use the T for the same types of trips and to the same places, the same number of days, weeks, or times of day? How has your use of other transportation changed? And then lastly, we're looking into mobility trends, and we want to ask, what trends do you think will change how people travel in the coming decades? For example, biking, ride sharing, car ownership, work from home, where you live or work, etc. And how do you think those patterns will evolve in 2050? And so with that, we're going to go into different breakout sessions led by Sandy and Paul and Laura and Kat. And so Terry will be breaking you off into those rooms now. We just ask that you are respectful and that you listen actively to everybody in the room, that you speak from your experience and you stay focused on the topic and be constructive, and make sure that everyone has the opportunity to participate. And with that, you'll be transferred off into your rooms and you can just hit join and start the discussion there. And we'll be right back in the main room after.
Recording stopped.
Time. And people changing your experience education system in our world in the coming decades, and how do you see that evolving out until 2050? And I will, as soon as I manage to copy the right thing on my clipboard, put those into the chat as well. So please just raise your hand if you would like to speak, and I can call on you. Just to confirm, can folks hear everything that I just said? Excellent. All right.
And folks like me who are shy, you're welcome to put some of your questions or comments in the chat. And we're happy to kind of record those as well and take them back.
Yes, we will be taking notes, and there will also be other opportunities to engage in the future, and we'll be able to hopefully share back some of the insights from these sessions. It's a lot of questions to process, totally understand, and take your time thinking about it, and also feel free to share anything else that you're thinking. I see a hand from Elias, go ahead.
Yes. So hi everyone, thank you so much for the presentation, and Sandy, I especially like the data analysis that you were doing. So I would probably, okay, I guess I'm kind of technically starting this whole discussion here. So let me try to do that by addressing the question on challenges, like what are some challenges I would like the team to address by 2050. I would say the main thing that I am seeing here is that, so I like how much the start of the conversation talks about trying to meet the Commonwealth goals of housing, economic development, sustainability and mobility, which I believe are indeed some of the greatest needs that Massachusetts as a whole and Boston in particular are facing. One thing that I am not seeing very clearly or very explicitly in a lot of the current plans for both Future 40 and Future 50 is how are we addressing, especially housing and economic development directly? Because there are a lot, obviously Boston is we have a we have pretty much of a housing crisis right now, especially when compared to other states that are building more housing. And I personally believe that more housing isn't necessarily shouldn't be seen as like isolated from more transit. So if we don't open up transit opportunities for more people, and so that developers can actually find parcels that they can build on, that where people can actually get to their work easily, then talking about more housing in a vacuum isn't going to be helpful without support from the T to actually enable such a long-term vision.
Thank you, Elias. Yeah, as you can tell, that's something we're thinking about a lot and that we're hoping to dig into as part of the plan. It's part of what our team has been working on as part of our work at the T. We're the strategic transit planning team, and that involves working on land use topics with our TOD department, our real estate department, as well as our municipalities and our regional planning authorities. So I think we really do see that interplay as very critical to understanding how the world's going to develop in the next 20, 25 years. Yeah. Susan, go ahead.
Sorry, took me a moment to unmute. Thank you. Well, I will build off of that last comment. I have a few things that I want to share. I appreciate that everyone's looking at what more can we be doing with our commuter rail and moving towards regional rail, because I really think there's an opportunity there for housing and economic development, help these many towns. So that's one thing. I also think that as we think about housing, having been the transportation manager for the town of Lexington for 8 years, what I noticed that as we were getting proposals from developers for new developments, particularly new housing developments, they wanted to add a lot of parking, right? And I think we have to find a way to be more flexible to enhance transit more quickly, because if we build for a lot more parking, then when we get to the point where we think, yay, we can build more transit, there's now more people, the problem is we have a lot of parking and that just is a lot of cars, and that's just going to slow the transit. And I'm just not sure we can build, dedicated lanes for all that transit. I also think no matter where people live, I mean, they create congestion anywhere. So I think we have to be really mindful about that and think of how can we be more skilled at it more rapidly enhancing transportation opportunities for people, so that we don't have to build, or developers and banks in particular don't think we have to build all this parking. In line with that, then, more crosstown connections and more transit hubs. Right now, particularly being like on the fringe of MBTA service, as you go a little farther out, if you just want to go across town, say north-south, it's really difficult. A lot of times you have to go all the way into Cambridge or Boston just to come back out. So I think, how can we have better crosstown connections? And then there's so much I could talk about, but the last thing I'll mention, and I know the T is trying to work on this, drop trips are really a problem. So continuing to work on that reliability would be great. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susan. Wide-ranging and very useful comment.
Susan, I just want to say hi. It's always a pleasure to see you on one of our calls, and it's always a pleasure to interact with you. You're the best.
Yes, it's always fun to have familiar faces on these calls. And I will say, Susan, to your point about drop trips, reliability data is one of the things that we wanted to get into this presentation, didn't quite have enough time to process it for bus, but there will be more included on that. And we have some pretty dramatic numbers that actually show that it can be very, very frustrating, and also we're making significant progress on that front. So stay tuned, stay tuned. Any other thoughts, comments? All right, I see a chat from Rachel. So I'm going to go with Rachel's comment in the chat, and then we will go to Emily. Rachel asks, are there any plans in the work to make new extensions or maybe add new lines for trains or new bus routes? So I'm going to go with bus first, because that is actually something that is actively underway at the moment. You may have heard of bus network redesign, which has been the MBTA's plan over the last 5 to 7 years to kind of rethink how the bus network is working, very much in alignment with the principles that we talked about in the presentation about reflecting a broader range of trips, not just kind of 9 to 5 commute trips, and making sure that we have good service for all kinds of different folks making all kinds of different trips, Adam, maybe you could throw the bus network redesign page link in the chat. So that is actively underway. Implementation is happening in kind of a incremental way over a period of years, but it's something we're very excited about, and the early returns have been really, really positive. So that's great. For new extensions for rapid transit, this is the opportunity to express interest in things like that. Traditionally, this is kind of the opportunity to dream big and think about where things might want to go, what would be helpful to the region. We also just are aware that, by law, this is not a plan where we have to think about money, but realistically, we are in a very fiscally constrained environment, and there's not a lot of money to go around. Those are big ticket, expensive items. And we also want to know that we know that we're not necessarily meeting everyone's needs without being able to think about some of those things. So please continue to be engaged with the process. Help us think about what some of those ideas that might work might be. Let's go to Emily.
Hi, I am with the Executive Office of Economic Development. I'm also a car-free T-rider, and I think for me, one of the biggest concerns, I think maybe over and above expansion of service, is just maintaining reliability. I understand that, especially in terms of heavy rail, we're working with some really old infrastructure, but it feels like we're in a cycle of just like trying to play catch up. And I think that like the delays I've been experiencing are more, I've lived in other cities with major metros, New York, Chicago, and I just feel like this is a much more frequent occurrence. And from an economic development, perspective is obviously crucial to know that if you are taking transit to get to work or to a doctor's appointment or to pick your child up from daycare, that you're going to get there on time. So it obviously it's a really difficult thing to do. But is there a way to make strategic investments now that will leave, putting the money in upfront to make sure that these kinds of breakdowns are happening less frequently?
Yeah, thank you, Emily. And I'm also a former Chicagoan. I went to high school there. My parents are still there. And definitely, I would say everything you said is very much in alignment with how we're thinking about things at the T right now, right? We have had the wonderful leadership of General Manager Ang, now also Secretary of Transportation Ang, over the last couple of years, and have really focused on kind of whipping the system into shape to provide that kind of reliability. Obviously, there are still points of struggle, among them perhaps the Red Line fleet, among others, and also with bus, as you saw from some of the congestion data, and also what Susan was talking about with drop trips, although those metrics are also still improving. But we are very much in the mindset that the best thing we can do is to provide that reliable and frequent service so that folks can get where they need to go quickly and know that the T is there to be trusted. And that's important for our riders. It's important for businesses and economic development so they can count on their workers being able to be there. It's important to our neighborhoods. It's important to our communities and our municipal partners, again, so that they know that the T can be there to support them. And it really is so important to the whole Commonwealth.
Okay.
I see a comment in the chat from Stephen about extending the Needham line to Newton Upper Falls. Interesting idea. That one had not been on my radar. Thank you. We will take it under consideration and give it a look. Any other thoughts or questions? I am particularly interested to hear from folks about this mobility trends question. What should we be thinking about? What are the threats, opportunities, challenges that we might see over the next 20 to 25 years? Yeah, Elias, go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily want to speak again, but since I do have some thoughts, so let me do so. So I think one thing that I was quite intrigued by when looking at your data analysis, Sandy, was that I think you are showing that right now minority riders are almost approaching like 80% of the T's full ridership. So I do wonder if there is an association between like, well, I mean, I do wonder if there's an association between like income and transit dependency over here, because for example, it could indicate that if we are looking, I mean, my hypothesis is that post-COVID, we may have been sliding back to the stereotypical notion of transit in the US, where this is only for poor people, and then the rich people either drive their cars or take Uber or something, whereas the poor people who do not have the income to do so are stuck on taking buses or trains to work. And I think this is gonna be quite a regression from where it was back, especially pre-COVID, where Boston actually was one of those places where rich people, including for example in Cambridge, also heavily relied on transit to work, even if not as much as more well-known places like New York. So one thing that I would want to see the T be able to address is to maintain competitive in this kind of environment, especially when commuting trends and like just like travel patterns in general are shifting to things like off-peak and weekend travel, where traditional ways of operating transit is kind of naturally more disadvantaged at doing.
Yeah, thank you. Those numbers, when I saw them in our presentation, were pretty stark. It surprised me. I didn't know that. And I think most people who've been engaged in the transit world probably know that there is generally a correlation, an inverse correlation between income and transit ridership. That is to say that the less money you have, the more likely you are to be riding transit. I think Boston is one of the places that for a long time has defied that trend. And now we wonder if that is kind of becoming more segregated along those lines again. And we really do think that kind of just providing good, reliable, frequent service and growing that where we have the opportunity is one of the best ways to get everyone riding transit, which we do think is really, really important to the future of the region and the T. I want to see Stephen had a couple more thoughts in the chat. Cape Cod commuter rail and Red Line extension to Arlington. So Stephen, you may know that the legislature actually earmarked a little bit of money in the last session to study extending commuter rail to Buzzards Bay. So MassDOT's Office of Transportation Planning is working on scoping that study, and there will be a fresh look at it within the coming months. And Red Line extension to Arlington, something that we've heard very strongly with advocacy at the MBTA board. Obviously, that was something that was on the agenda, 40 years ago, and got left on the cutting board because of local opposition and lack of funding. Certainly have heard the advocacy and can include it in the list of things to look at, excuse me. And Emily says in the chat, with current challenges in our aging population, how's the T thinking about the future of the workforce and hiring enough operators to meet the system's needs? What an excellent question. This is not my realm of expertise. I will say that within our strategic plan, which our department is kind of the shepherd of, we have 8 strategic goals. One of them is about the workforce. So it is something that's been of kind of preeminent concern for the T over the last several years. When I started the T, just about 3 years ago, and I think the head count was something like 5,000 at the time, and now it's nearly 8,000. So we're really, really proud of that growth. Obviously, it does present fiscal challenges, but a lot of those people are bus operators. And we are very, very proud to have been able to up those numbers over the years. And that is what allows us to grow service. So when we are thinking about that, we're thinking about skills transitions in the workforce as we're bringing battery buses online, as everything becomes electrified. We're going to need to change job roles. We're going to need folks to learn new skills, and that's going to be a bit of a challenge. But I will say, just from what I know of having discussions with colleagues, it's something that's on everyone's mind. It's something we're actively thinking about. I see a hand from Susan.
Hi, thanks again. I may have missed your last question, Sandy. I heard something about threats and then a discussion on segregation. I had to feed my dog, sorry. But like going along with those themes, one of the things I've wondered about is you know, I've always been so surprised at how many separate transportation services we have in the Commonwealth, and particularly in this Boston metro region. I don't know how much you all have dug into that, but I do realize that in some places, like if a new company opens up and there's no transit service, the quickest, easiest thing is for them to just like have their own little corporate shuttle, right? And there may not be any other demand, and that may make the most sense. So I do understand that. But I wonder if we have a process or could have a process to continually evaluate this and maybe find a way for employers, residential, property owners, universities and others to contribute more to a shared public transit service that we could make more robust with more people participating in it, rather than so many people kind of peeling off and doing their own transportation service. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Certainly both the funding element and the kind of fragmentation of the transit experience are concerns here, right? In that if everyone is starting up their service that meets their exact needs, that's great. And whatever takes cars off the road, whatever allows people to travel without cars, that we support that. We think it's great. And the more services that are very specific to a specific kind of rider, the more it fragments the transit system. And I think we and MassDOT, if you look at MassDOT's Beyond Mobility statewide plan, it talks a lot about the seamless rider experience. We feel that moving toward a future where everything is accessible to everyone can be really positive. A lot of my work personally at the T revolves around coordinating with our regional transit authorities, with our transportation management associations, which for those who may not know, are the business associations that often operate some of these shuttles. And we're building really positive relationships with them. Right now I'm helping to manage a study where we're looking at the points where our system connects with theirs and what the rider experience is like. Is there wayfinding signage? Is there a place to sit? Are we able to make the transfer easy for folks? But it's having those operations and being able to work together is a way to extend the reach of the T into places where we may not be able to prioritize, or where things are just more specific than we are able to do, and those folks are able to be responsive to very, very specific local needs in a way that as a regional organization, we may just not always be able to prioritize. And we're just trying to keep in mind how we can work with everyone. And I see Elias says in the chat, Easy Ride in Cambridge seems hugely successful, especially post-COVID, where they dropped the requirement of being a Kendall or MIT employee and opened up the route to everyone and started joining forces with other entities like Cambridge Side Mall, and it runs pretty frequently. Yes. Yeah, we are big fans of Easy Ride. We've worked with them a lot. And actually, when we started field testing the study that I was just talking about, looking at connection points between the T and other operators, the first place we looked was the Easy Ride stop at Lechmere, which we found needs better signage. So we're going to be working with them on that. And we love to see people showing initiative and coming to the table to work with us. I want to know, we have 5 minutes left in the breakout room. We will be leaving at 6:35 to finish up the main meeting. So any more thoughts or comments, questions? Where are we going with this plan? Any questions or thoughts you have about the T? What's going to happen to the world over the next 20 years? I see Elias has in the chat also the need for new crosstown connections, especially new rail lines. Boston has many emerging destinations like Longwood, Kendall, Seaport, Assembly, West Station, which are now tedious to get to via transit when the rail route can cover twice the distance than alternatives, regardless of how reliable trains are. I think the important part with that, Elias, is that we're working with a very radial system where everything descends on downtown Boston that we have inherited from a time when the system was built, in many cases over 100 years ago now, when employment especially was much more concentrated in downtown Boston than it is. And now we have, downtown Boston is still the biggest jobs cluster in the region, but we do have these secondary centers like Longwood, like Kendall, like the Seaport. And one thing we do notice is that transit's mode share, the percentage of people who are taking transit, in those places, even if they're only a mile from downtown Boston, is noticeably lower than in downtown Boston. So there is a need to adapt the network. We are trying. That was one of the major emphases of bus network redesign, was providing much better service to those areas. And in the long run, we need to be thinking about how to provide them like truly robust and high quality service. We have 3 more minutes. I see Stephen says Route 134 extension to LRTA. Stephen, that's a very specific suggestion. And, I love it. That's the kind of thing thinking about extending how our services can connect with RTA services that I like to think about a lot. It fits right into my job description. So thank you for bringing that up. As well as expanded Cape Flyer service. I know that's been something that's been on the radar for a while. Right now, we are pretty constrained. My understanding is that we're pretty constrained by not being allowed to open the bridge over the or close the bridge over the Cape Cod Canal more often. That's a Army Corps of Engineers and a Coast Guard decision. But we are aware and working with our partners at the Cape Cod RTA, who have a lot of responsibility for that service, that this is something that we think there's demand for. And Alex says in the chat, hey Alex, how are you doing? I'm curious the balance of decarbonization, electrification, and its impact on our facility needs in the long term. And this is something that Alex works on at the T. So just being curious. Yes, we are thinking about this a lot, as you know. I will say, perhaps this is a good opportunity to say, beyond just facilities, right? How we think about decarbonization and electrification is really important. And we at the T believe, and we think this is an evidence-based belief, is that mode shift and getting more people on transit is the single biggest thing that the T can do for the climate. And that there is a circumstance where getting folks on transit, even if that's not immediate reduction in the T's own emissions, helps the entire Commonwealth to reduce its emissions. That's been proven time and time again in research to be a really powerful tool for climate and emissions. And so we're very excited about talking more about that. And Stephen says new locomotives. Yes, we have procurements out. That's been in the news recently, both for fully electrified locomotives and so for some much cleaner new diesel locomotives to help replace the oldest and least reliable ones in our fleet. Very much on our minds. We know that the state of the commuter rail locomotive fleet is not particularly great. All right, and it's now 6:35, so I believe we will be rejoining the main room. Thank you, great conversation, really appreciate it, and keep up the engagement, which we'll talk about in the main room.
Thanks, folks.
I don't know how to get back to the main room, if it just goes back automatically or what's going on here, guys. Oh, leave breakout room, okay. Return to main session. Let's go.
Thank you everyone for engaging with us in the breakout. We've heard how much the discussions were so rich. We're just
Recording
waiting
in
for
progress.
join back in. Again, thank you all so much for engaging in discussion and providing all your feedback and comments. It's been very insightful. We appreciate your time. We'll just wait a few more moments for folks to come in, okay? Thank you. We're just waiting for a few more moments for folks to come in and then we'll get started. Okay, next slide, please. next one. Okay, great. Thank you all for such a rich discussion and for engaging with your breakout sessions. If you didn't get your feedback in during our breakout group, or if you have specific questions, we have a number of upcoming ways to gather feedback. So please feel free to use the chat to add any comments you'd like us to note tonight, but also see here for all the upcoming ways for you to engage with us. We'll be having an in-person open house at La Colaborativa in Chelsea on April 15th at 5:30. We'll be having another open house in person at ABCD in Boston on May 7th at 5:30. We'll be also having an open house in Lawrence, to be determined as to the time and date, but we'll get back to you on that. And then we'll have other virtual opportunities for us to engage with you similar to this. But this is for our CIP, and that will be on March 31st at 6 o'clock, as well as April 13th at 6 p.m. in person, though, at 10 Park Plaza right here in downtown. So if you'd like to talk more about capital investment projects, you can come to our CIP public meetings. But if you'd like to focus more on our Focus 2050, you can do that in person at our open houses upcoming. And with that, we can go to the next slide. You can also contact us here at this email at focus2050@mbta.com. Thank you all for taking your time to help us start this important project tonight. And this is only the beginning of an 18-month discussion. And we look forward to continuing to gather your input and share our progress with you as well. So please email us here, come to our meetings, come to our events, and continue to engage with us as you've done in our breakout discussions tonight. Thank you all and have a wonderful evening. We really appreciate your time. Bye.
Is that it? There gotta be more than that, right?
Thank you.
Is it over? All right. All right, guys. We will be back at 8 o'clock. We'll talk more about this later. I thank you guys for joining me. Appreciate each and every one of you. We'll be back here tonight at 8. Thank you for stopping by. Appreciate